Hello everyone! In the middle of a sweltering summer noon in Houston, gunshots suddenly rang out, sending nearby residents fleeing in panic. Just minutes later, as the smoke cleared, a horrifying scene appeared. A Vietnamese man lay motionless inside a small shop, his chef's jacket soaked through with dark red blood. At first glance, it seemed like a routine robbery that escalated into murder. But what investigators uncovered afterward revealed a brazen chain of crimes that stretched on for hours. And what shocked everyone the most was the killer's age. So who was the perpetrator bold enough to strike in broad daylight? Don't look away, because right after this, Vietnamese Case Files will take you on the journey to uncover the truth behind a series of crimes that once shook an entire community. If you find today's story intense, please hit like and share this video with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe so you can continue following Vietnamese Case Files on the next case-solving journeys. At around 1 p.m. on March 29th, 2016, people at a commercial strip along Fondren Street were startled by a string of loud bangs coming from Wahoo's Fish and Wings. A kitchen worker rushed to the front to check and was horrified to find Nguyen Minh Tri, the restaurant's owner, lying motionless on the floor, his chef's jacket drenched in blood. In desperation, the employee shouted his name, trembling as he pulled out his phone and called 911. Just minutes later, Houston police arrived on scene. The terrible news quickly spread through the Vietnamese community living nearby. Tri's mother, his wife, and several relatives rushed to the restaurant after hearing what had happened. By then, police had already taped off the entrance, keeping crowds of onlookers and the victim's family from going inside. Wahoo's Fish and Wings was a small eatery, with about 4 to 5 tables inside and a cashier counter right by the front door. When detectives from the Houston Police Department entered, their attention immediately went to the victim's body lying on its back on the floor near the entrance. Paramedics quickly confirmed he had died from gunshot wounds. The scene showed signs of a violent struggle. A chair had been knocked over, and a few loose bills were scattered near the register, leading investigators to believe the incident likely began as an attempted robbery. Near the victim, police found a handgun that belonged to Tri, with the ammunition still intact in the magazine. It appeared that in the split second of confrontation, he had tried to draw his gun to defend himself, but never fired a single shot before he was killed. Crime scene technicians recovered 2 9mm shell casings on the floor, believed to have been fired from the shooter's gun. Marks on the wall indicated that after hitting the victim, the attacker fired another shot, possibly a warning before fleeing. There were no signs the cash register had been forced open, suggesting the suspect may have panicked and left before taking any property. The only major lead was a small camera mounted on the ceiling, pointed directly at the front door. From the footage, police saw the attacker was a young man wearing brown khaki pants, sagging low on his hips, a gray hoodie pulled up to cover his head, and a pair of bright light blue athletic shoes. He stood at the doorway with one hand held inside his hoodie pocket, tense, apparently already gripping a gun inside. Notably, the light blue sneakers were unusually eye-catching and rare, leading police to believe that detail could be critical in identifying him. According to his family, Nguyen Minh Tri, 35 years old, was of Vietnamese heritage and had immigrated to the United States with his family many years ago. He was the youngest child in a large family. After years of hard work in a new country, his parents had tried to build him a future. Wahoo's Fish and Wings was that very foundation. Passionate about food and deeply committed to the business, Tri poured nearly all of his time and energy into turning Wahoo's into a familiar neighborhood spot. To neighbors and regulars, he wasn't just a restaurant owner, he was a friendly face who was always willing to help. Many people recalled how Tri would cheerfully throw in extra chicken wings or French fries for the kids in the neighborhood when they stopped by, or how he would generously discount meals or even let customers pay later when he saw they were struggling. His generosity and sincerity made him widely loved. He treated his employees the same way, approachable and fair, willing to do everything alongside them from cooking to cleaning, never looking down on any task in the restaurant. Just a few months before the tragedy, Tri had married a Vietnamese woman and became a stepfather to her 5-year-old son. That new happiness only made him work harder, determined to build a stable home. He planned to expand the menu with a few new dishes, hoping the business would grow so he could eventually buy a small house for his wife and child. But all of those plans and dreams were cut short forever that fateful noon. Nguyen Minh Trie's death was not only a devastating loss for his family, it also left a deep emptiness in the hearts of the local Vietnamese community, where many had come to see him as family. Right after the shooting, the Houston Police Department's Homicide Division moved in quickly. From the surveillance footage, investigators determined the attacker had an average build, stood about 1.57 to 1.65 meters tall, wore a gray hoodie and light brown pants, and most notably had on a striking pair of light blue athletic shoes. Witnesses near the scene reported that immediately after the gunshots, someone saw a bronze gold car speeding out of the parking lot in front of Wahoo's. No one managed to catch the license plate, but the detail was recorded as an important lead. Multiple investigative tracks were launched at once. One team began extracting footage from nearby security cameras along Fondren Street and West Airport Boulevard to trace the suspect. Sure enough, video from a nearby business showed a young man whose clothing matched the description, sprinting out of Wahoo's and jumping into the passenger seat of a yellow two-door car that appeared to be waiting. The car then sped south on Fondren. This detail led detectives to conclude the killer did not act alone. There was at least one accomplice serving as the getaway driver, waiting outside to help him escape. A description of the yellow car was quickly shared with neighboring law enforcement agencies in case the suspects crossed into other jurisdictions. At the same time, another group of investigators continued to comb through and analyze the scene in detail. Forensic results confirmed that the two shell casings recovered at the scene were 9mm rounds fired from a semi-automatic handgun. However, police found no clear fingerprints on the cashier counter or the entrance. This suggested the attacker likely wore gloves or deliberately avoided direct contact with surfaces. Within 24 hours of the killing, detectives had formed a general profile of the suspect. A dark-skinned male, under 20 years old, average build, acting alone inside the restaurant, but with an accomplice waiting outside as the getaway driver. He acted recklessly, daring to open fire in broad daylight, showing an aggressive mindset and a willingness to use violence when met with resistance. Investigators initially identified robbery as the motive. The suspect rushed in demanding cash, but the victim fought back fiercely. However, a major question emerged. Was this just an isolated robbery, or had the suspect struck elsewhere in the area before? That question was soon answered. Just a few hours after Nguyen Minh Trie was shot, another armed robbery took place at a nearby Shipley's Donuts. The suspect was also described as a young man wearing a gray top, brown pants, and blue athletic shoes, an eerie, soft coincidence that was hard to ignore. Not stopping there, later that same day, a Food Dollar grocery store on South Post Oak was robbed by an individual with similar features, who then fled in a bronze gold car. By the afternoon, at New China restaurant in the neighboring city of Missouri City, the owner reported that a young man in a gray hoodie and low-slung brown pants used a gun to demand money, then ran out to a waiting yellow car and sped away. The New China owner even chased the robber into the parking lot and nearly caught him, but only managed to see the suspect jump into the passenger seat before the car vanished. In other words, in a single afternoon, the same thief had carried out 4 robberies in a row. He was so brazen that he didn't even change clothes or hide the distinctive blue sneakers even after committing a deadly shooting. 2 weeks after the robbery spree, with help from a forensic sketch artist, police completed a composite drawing based on witness descriptions. The sketch depicted a young black male with sharp features and short hair. At the same time, technicians compiled surveillance clips from multiple scenes into a single video showing the same person repeatedly appearing with the same outfit and behavior. Those images were released at a press conference held by investigators on April 15, 2016, to ask for the public's help. Police urged anyone who recognized the suspect or had information about the suspicious bronze gold vehicle to contact law enforcement immediately or call the Crime Stoppers hotline. A reward would be offered to anyone who provided a tip, leading to the suspect's arrest. The appeal quickly worked. As the suspect's images spread across local news, investigators received a flood of calls. Among them, an anonymous Crime Stoppers tip produced a key lead. The caller suspected a teenager known as K was involved. According to this person, K was about 16 years old and lived in an apartment complex not far from the crime scene. He often dressed exactly like the descriptions in the news, frequently wearing low-slung pants and light-colored sneakers. Lately, he had suddenly been carrying an unusual amount of cash, and he had also disappeared for several days right around the time the string of robberies took place. Investigators immediately took notice of the tip. After weeks of tracking leads, police gathered enough evidence to narrow in on a suspect. The yellow car was found abandoned in an empty parking lot, matching witness descriptions exactly. Inside the vehicle, officers found a pair of blue Nike athletic shoes tossed under the seat, an exact match to the shoes the suspect wore in the surveillance footage. Fingerprint analysis from the car further strengthened the case. The prints matched the record of the teenage K. Since he had a minor prior incident, his biometric data had already been stored in the system. At that point, the mystery was nearly solved. On July 11th, 2016, Houston investigators, working with a task force, carried out a surprise raid and arrested K at his family's apartment in the southern part of the city. The operation happened quickly in the early hours, and the teen was taken into custody before he could resist. During the search, police seized a semi-automatic handgun. Ballistics later confirmed it was the weapon that took Nguyen Minh Trie's life. They also found a gray hoodie and brown khaki pants in the suspect's closet. With the evidence so clear, all doubt was officially put to rest. That afternoon, the Houston Police Department held a press conference announcing the arrest of the killer in the Wahoo's Fish and Wings case, bringing a tense investigation of nearly 4 months to an end and sending shockwaves through the local Vietnamese community. When the news broke, the public was stunned to learn that the person who killed Nguyen Minh Trie and carried out the string of shocking robberies was just a 16-year-old. Court records listed him as D. Johnson, a pseudonym used, because he was a minor at the time of the crimes. Johnson was an African-American teen, born and raised in Houston, in a working-class family struggling with hardship. His family moved to Southwest Houston a few years before the case, living in a neighborhood known for being rough and unsafe. People who knew him said Johnson grew up with little supervision. His father had become entangled with the criminal justice system, while his mother worked 2 jobs to survive, leaving Johnson with near total freedom to roam the streets. From a young age, he was especially obsessed with collecting colorful sneakers, his favorite being a blue pair of Nike shoes. The very detail that later became a crucial identifier in the case. That environment led Johnson to drop out of school early, then fall in with a bad crowd near the apartment complex where he lived. Before the crimes, he had a minor record for petty theft and had been placed under local supervision for a short period. But no one expected that quiet, small-framed teenager to become such a brazen robber willing to strike brutally in broad daylight. Leading up to the crimes, Johnson was struggling financially after being fired from the grocery store where he worked part-time. The need for money, combined with the bad influence of his street-running friends, pushed him deeper down a criminal path. Some sources claim Johnson had been involved with a small street crew known for theft and snatch-and-grab robberies, and that the robbery spree that day may have been a test of nerve set by older members of the group. Even though the exact motive remains debated, it was clear that greed, impulsiveness, and a reckless, aggressive mindset drove a teenager into serious crime. According to Johnson's statement, around midday on March 29, 2016, he and an accomplice drove around Houston looking for targets. When they reached the intersection of Fondren Road and West Airport Boulevard, Johnson saw the sign for Wahoo's Fish and Wings and decided it would be their first target. At the time, the restaurant was fairly empty. Only the owner, Nguyen Minh Trie, a Vietnamese man, was behind the counter. At around 1 p.m., Johnson pulled up his face covering, tightened his grip on the gun in his pocket, and walked inside. Trie looked up and greeted him as usual, but froze when he saw the masked man point a gun and demand money. In a split-second fight for survival, Trie tried to reach for his own handgun from beneath the counter, but that move panicked Johnson. He fired 2 shots. The first hit Trie in the chest and dropped him to the floor, while the second grazed the wall. Without even taking the cash, Johnson bolted out to the getaway car, leaving the victim collapsed in a pool of blood. The yellow car sped off before anyone could react. Inside the car, Johnson was overwhelmed by the realization of what he had done, but the fear was quickly drowned out by greed and recklessness. He and his accomplice decided to keep going to make it worth it. A little after 1 p.m., they stopped at a Shipley's Donuts on Stella Link Road. Johnson pulled up his face covering again, rushed in with the gun, and threatened the cashier. Terrified, the cashier immediately handed over all the money from the register. Johnson grabbed a handful of cash and ran back out to the car, escaping. Everything happened in under a minute. About half an hour later, the yellow car showed up at a Food Dollar store on South Post Oak. Johnson repeated the same routine. He threatened the clerk at gunpoint, forced the store owner to kneel, and stole cash along with a few small items. Getting away with it only made him bolder. At around 3 p.m., the pair went to the New China restaurant in nearby Missouri City. As Johnson rifled through the money and ran for the door, the owner grabbed a chair and chased after him, nearly catching his shirt. Johnson panicked, jumped into the car, and the yellow vehicle roared away in time. After the spree, Johnson and his accomplice went into hiding at a motel on the outskirts. The teen's mind was a storm of fear, adrenaline, and guilt. He had become a killer, but shaped by the gang lifestyle. Johnson quickly pushed aside any remorse. The two split the small amount of money they had stolen, then went their separate ways, believing it would all blow over. But the net of justice tightened fast. Just a few months later, Houston police tracked down the remaining trail, arrested Johnson, and brought the 16-year-old's crime spree to an end. Given the exceptionally serious nature of the case, prosecutors decided to charge Johnson with capital murder. Although he was only 16 at the time of the crime, after a hearing, the juvenile court allowed the case to be transferred for adult prosecution due to the brutality and dangerousness of his actions. In September 2017, the trial for the killing of Nguyen Minh Tri officially took place at the Harris County Courthouse, drawing intense public attention in Houston, especially from the Vietnamese community. In court, Johnson appeared timid, starkly different from the violent robber seen in surveillance footage. The victim's family sat quietly in the gallery, many holding his portrait in their arms. The courtroom atmosphere was tense and deeply emotional. Prosecutors described the defendant as a cold-blooded robber who took the life of an innocent man out of pure greed and asked for the harshest sentence possible. When the security camera video showing Tri being shot was played on the screen, the victim's mother broke down in sobs, forcing the judge to pause the proceedings briefly to calm everyone in the room. Faced with evidence that could not be denied, Johnson's defense attorney had no choice but to shift to seeking leniency, arguing that the defendant was still very young, came from a difficult background, and lacked understanding of the law. Johnson was advised to plead guilty to avoid the possibility of prosecutors seeking the maximum penalty. Under Texas law, offenders who were under 18 at the time of the crime do not face the death penalty. If convicted, the harshest punishment is life in prison with eligibility for parole review after 40 years served. In the end, after deliberation, the jury imposed the harshest sentence on Johnson. That meant he would remain behind bars until nearly age 60, with only a slim chance of ever returning to society. The verdict was delivered in a heavy silence. As the sentence was read, Johnson hung his head, his shoulders trembling as if he were crying, but no one could tell whether those tears were remorse or simply fear of the punishment awaiting him. In the gallery, the victim's family held one another, overcome with grief. Tri's mother, her hair almost completely gray, told reporters through sobs that she only hoped the long prison term would awaken the killer's conscience. Tri's young wife quietly wiped away tears and carried their small child as she left the courthouse after a long journey to seek justice for her husband. The murder of restaurant owner Nguyen Minh Tri sent shockwaves through Houston at the time. Local newspapers widely reported on the senseless crime that took the life of a gentle immigrant over a small amount of money. The Vietnamese community in Houston expressed deep outrage and sorrow. Many people gathered outside Wahoo's Fish and Wings, where the tragedy happened to hold a memorial, light candles, and pray for the beloved owner. As for the perpetrator, Johnson's sentence was supported by much of the public. Despite his young age, the cruelty of his actions was viewed as unforgivable. Some social advocates argued that the deeper roots should be examined, that Johnson was a product of poor education, gang violence, and family neglect. Still, the prevailing view remained that strict punishment was necessary to deter crime and protect the community. The case also sounded an alarm about armed juvenile crime. Many voices called on authorities to adopt more effective measures to control firearms, while also strengthening education and mental health support for at-risk teenagers. What do you think about this sentence? Can justice ever be enough to soothe the pain that remains? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like to explore more true crime cases with me, please like, share, and subscribe to Vietnamese Case Files so we can keep meeting again in future videos. Thank you for watching, and see you again at this same time tomorrow.